Starting.
All right, so I will begin. So this afternoon's special meeting of the board will be conducted pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, which suspends certain requirements of the Ralph M. Brown Act. In response to the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak, the district will conduct this special meeting of the board as a teleconference. Please use the following toll-free number and meeting ID to call into the meeting. Telephone 6699009128, meeting ID 881-8145-2056, passcode 707590, or join on a computer. The link is on our website, TUSD.org, under board meetings. Public comments can be submitted prior to 3 p.m. on the day of the board meeting by completing the appropriate submission form on our website under quick links on the board page, and participants must be logged into the meeting via the Zoom link published above or by dialing in. Your Zoom participant name or phone number must match the name on what you've logged in so that you can be accurately identified. And any reasonable accommodation for an individual with a disability can contact my office at 310-972-6001, and we've got no one that has contacted me. So, Madam President, the meeting is now for you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Stowe. Item number 2, I am calling the meeting to order. 3, adoption of the agenda. May I have a motion for adoption of the March 31st special meeting of the Board of Education agenda?
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, great, motion passes. Item number 4 is public comments, and my understanding is there are no public comments. So we are going to move on to item number 5, our board workshop. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board workshop will provide an overview of work that is currently occurring in TUSD and the need to address equity issues moving forward. Current data trends in student achievement, school discipline, and graduation rates will be presented, followed by a board discussion. Dr. Crumpy?
Actually, I'll go first, if you don't mind, Madam President and board members. So Gil, if you wouldn't mind sharing the screen and getting the presentation rolling. So as was in the board item, what we're going to do today is really an overview of the current work that the district is doing as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, some plans for next steps, the data that we've used to analyze this, and then board discussion. We've allocated about half the time for discussion among the board to be able to provide staff with maybe some future direction, questions that you'd like us to explore, or other elements to include in the LCAP. And we will have an LCAP, Local Control Accountability Plan board workshop on May 12th at 3 o'clock. So that agenda item will be forthcoming. But so as we look at the presentation, the first slide really, I mean, we have a board policy on equity, and I think that's important to recognize here, and that
Real quick, I don't have the slide up. Dr. Crumpy was sharing it, but she got booted out somehow, so she's trying to come back in. But I'll look for the presentation. Oh,
okay. I'm just going to briefly go slides 4, 5, 6, and 7. We've got board policy, as you know, on equity. It's board policy 0415. We looked at it recently in the Masters of Governance program, and to ensure that we have a commitment to equity in our school district. And so you can go to the next slide. And this commitment to equity really is for the educational excellence of all students, to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to get the desired outcomes for our students. And so as we go on through the next slide, this element of the board policy talks about that we seek out and identify biases and gaps that keep students from reaching the goals that we set for them. because, and this is part of our ongoing work, both at the district level and at the school site level, through the collection of data and other means to identify those students and those practices that that will result in the level of achievement we want for all of our students. The next slide identifies a number of different things that we do. The print's a little bit small, but we routinely assess data, right? We look at all kinds of information that comes to us, that we ask schools to collect, that we report to the state and county, different agencies to identify what are our student achievement. We look at things like hiring and making sure that we are continually looking to try to hire employees that connect and represent our student population. And as you know, this is an ongoing effort for us. And then the final bullet, that we're continually doing program evaluation. We're looking at on an ongoing basis, is it working? Are these things that we are trying to do to address the equity issues in our district, is it working? If not, what can we do to make course corrections? And then finally, the board policy is that the board regularly monitors this. And I think this workshop in particular is a great step in the direction for what I know you all care about so deeply, and that is to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to provide everything that our students need to be successful. And it looks different for different students. And so we're going to move into here some demographic information, which I think you'll find very interesting. So we do not have a majority among our students. We're a very diverse district. We've got more than 70 languages spoken in our schools. We have had quite a diverse district for many decades, and that's something that we celebrate and we're very proud of. I think it separates us from a number of other districts in that our schools and students accept the variety of cultures represented. You can see here some interesting data points that our Hispanic Latino population makes up 31% of our student population, Asian 29% of our students are low income, and although only 0.6% of our students are homeless, that is a number that you'll see in the next slide. That's actually in a couple slides. It's kind of grown. So here's a breakdown for the last 10 years. So you can see that our white population has decreased by 10% in the last 10 years, and our Hispanic Latino has gone up 11%. So the others are relatively flat, but there's quite a change there with regard to the demographics in TUSD in the last 10 years, and we don't see that changing that direction. And then finally, the last slide that I'm going to present is about the different categories that some of our students fall into. So you can see that our students with disabilities have increased slightly. The biggest growth has been in our homeless population, and again, only 145 students, but a almost over 300% increase from where we were just 5 years ago. This information's in the last 5 years. And that our foster youth and English learners and also low income students have declined slightly. So all this is part of the information that we share and that we look to make different decisions on and work with schools, because within each school community, they have shifts that don't necessarily mirror this exactly. So making sure that our site administrators and teachers and all staff are aware of these changes and the different opportunities that they bring to change their programs to meet the needs of students is something that we address continually. So at this point in time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Crumpy, who will go through some more data that will be presented, and that's for anybody watching, that's in the board item, they can download and look at this PDF as well. So Katie?
Thank you, Dr. Stowe. I'm going to talk for a few minutes before we do into a deeper data dive about what are the efforts that are already in progress. And like Dr. Stowe said, as we follow these demographics, we work really hard to work with our school sites to address any of the changing demographics so that we can best meet the needs of our students. We've developed a draft of a schematic that kind of visually represents the work being done and our upcoming work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. You'll see this slide replicated towards the end of the presentation, where I'm going to actually describe and kind of talk about it in greater detail. But this kind of does represent, at least with titles, some of the work that we have upcoming within the district. And efforts in progress, and yes, this is smaller font, and there was a little arm wrestling about what actually made it onto the slide, because there's a lot of things that are being done. But just to highlight a couple, you may have heard about the 15-minute meeting. We started that last year prior to the pandemic, and have seen some positive progress with being able to have our principals come to us. Sometimes these meetings, it's a laugh because they do take longer than 15 minutes, but we give them homework, and they have to come and address how they are ensuring that we are following the students that need the most help and attention. And so you're going to hear a lot and see a lot about our homeless students today. And that's an example of where, demographically, as Tim talked about, the changing demographics, the huge increase in homeless, but also it isn't a subgroup at any one school. When collectively at the district, it's a subgroup. You have to have at least 30 students in the district for us to receive data on that group. And so schools are not receiving data as a group on their homeless students. And so we have to look at that individually. And so that's something that we've really been focusing on with them. And you'll also hear a little bit more throughout the presentation about our new data warehouse, our Who Knew It. And it's still in its infancy, it's brand new, but you're gonna see data on these slides from Who Knew It that allows us to do some analytics in real time. Typically, like for example, we take the CAS test in May, and although we get individual student results back and things, we don't get dashboard data reported from that May exam until the following December. And so we're excited that we'll be able to disaggregate and follow and intervene on students in a lot quicker fashion. And I know too, something that came up in the Blue Ribbon Committee last week was, how are we ensuring programmatically that some of our underrepresented groups are in our AP and our honors courses, and so that's been a lot of work that we've been seeing and noticing and paying a lot of attention to, where we've got over 100 students that are these underrepresented groups, and they're the GPAs that are at like 2.5 to 3.0, not our AP honors kids, that we have taking English 4 and concurrently in taking a college English class at the same time to give them that college exposure and experience and success. We have geometry classes that we have started similarly, not to accelerate the 4.0 student, but this underrepresented group where we're handpicking these kids. And we had 2 high schools offer summer geometry last year, so that we could accelerate and give them the opportunities to also get to AP Calculus by their senior year. We only have first semester results thus far, but very promising results. So you'll hear a little bit more along the lines, and we could go on and on, but this is a work in progress that we hope to always strengthen, do better, increase the work and the support that we give to our students. In one of these, for one example, we had over 60 participants that started a culturally relevant teaching and learning, or CRTL, course that the Los Angeles County Office of Ed put on. It was started in December, And from that, a leadership team kind of evolved, or a committee evolved, and from that, even a leadership team. And from that, some of our middle schools didn't want to wait for us for next year and to some of the training. And they had Dr. Shalaki Hawley. He is an expert in this field. And our middle schools had him present on this topic during our pupil free day just a few weeks ago. And you see here that almost 3/4 of the participants responded that they're going to make a shift based on some of the ideas that he shared with them. And you see all 2/3 of students of our teachers are asking for more. And so more on that later, but very encouraging. And you see also here, when they took the time to do a little deeper dive and give us some comments, that it really was reflective for our teachers. That was very, very encouraging, that they are self-evaluating and wanting more and wanting to do a good job for all of the students in their classrooms. And so as we then kind of move on to what direction and what kind of emerges is what does our data say? And so before we start this, just keep in mind that we didn't give the CASP test last year. So the data that we're sharing as far as our state summative exams is a little stale. And so some of these scores are affected just accordingly. And then just snapshots of that. This is this data warehouse that I've talked about that really lets not just us, but our school sites and our teachers be able to go in and see how attendance is going and how kids are doing in their grades. And so we really are, it's a shame that we had to kick this off in the middle of a pandemic where we haven't been able to do as much training as we've wanted to, but we're raring to go so that we can use that real-time data. This kind of says a lot. And what this is so with all of the state, the dashboard, and we get colors and scores on our English language arts, our math, our chronic absenteeism, our suspension rate, our graduation rate, college and career indicator, and we get different colors. Obviously blue is good, and this orange, there's a red color. We don't have red, but orange is not as good. And when we kind of average all of these, this kind of gives you a picture of how we do collectively within all of our demographic and programmatic data. And I want you to just kind of highlight anything below a 3. We need to pay some particular attention to. The 3 in the yellow, we're moving towards that green, and think we can get there. We really, the homeless, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, foster youth is something in aggregate to pay particular attention to. In ELA, just looking at a few slides of ELA and math achievement, you see here where we've got gaps really for our low-income students. You see where our ethnicity groups are performing, and then we've kind of subdivided it here for how they do if they're low income or not low income. For example, if you are low income and African American, you kind of bring your eye down to the screen, you perform at the same level than if you're an English learner. And so it really to be in a program and have a different ethnicity, we need to pay attention. 2 or more different categories lowers your achievement in Torrance at this time. And math is very similar, very, very similar data that we see here for our math score as well. So again, that low income, paying particular attention to those students. Also wanted to compare and spend a minute to compare about how we're doing with the county and the state, because it's easy to get tied into some of these scores. And you see that we do have smaller achievement gaps for our Hispanic, for our African American students than the county or the state. Doesn't mean that we want it, we can't improve and don't want to improve, and we need to do better. But it is still better to be a student in Torrance than to be a student anywhere else in the county and the state, we think. In these cases where we're outperforming, and you bring your eye down to the bottom with our homeless youth, we outperform in every group, unless you're homeless. And so that is something that we are paying attention to. We don't like that data point. And it's very similar in math. Your eyes can go to Torrance ahead on the black side all the way down, but not so much in homeless. We're also underperforming. I will also add here, because the ELA and math data look similar in these graphs. We are happy that we have made some strides, that I think it's on the next slide. I apologize. But we are really looking at our math data. Something that we discovered 4 or 5 years ago was that our lowest score in English language arts was in 3rd grade, the first year that they took the CASP test. And it was pretty linear to where every year kids got better until they left us in the 11th grade with over 3/4 of our students meeting or exceeding the standards in English. Math is the complete opposite. The highest score our students got in math is the first time they took the assessment in grade 3. And it was pretty linearly going the other way. And our lowest score was as 11th grade. And so we have been really working on math achievement. And you're going to see this in the next couple of slides. This just shows the data in another way. Are we making progress? And are we growing from the last 4 years? Again, we didn't have scores this year, so that's why it says 2019 on this chart. And we are in every group, except our low income students. That's decreased 3%. We are making growth in that area. So that low income, again, is another trigger that we've seen on some earlier slides. And then in math, and this is where, again, very similar data. Our low income students are mirroring. They haven't made a huge progress, but they haven't digressed. But we have made great strides with over 10% growth over the last 4 years for our African American, Filipino, Hispanic, and homeless youth with the effort. So there has been a larger gain with some of our subgroup students in mathematics. Our challenge, though, is really when you look demographically at our African American students. They are our lowest performing group among all of our ethnicities. And it's a small group. It's only 4% of our entire population. So when you then look at the ones the African American students that are not meeting or exceeding the standard, it's really less than 300 students in our 20,000 plus district. Just comparatively, we have over 1,000 teachers. So it's over a 3-to-1 ratio of classroom instructors to African American students in need. I've challenged our principals to to kind of look at this and take this approach, this personal, individualized attention approach that in this case, I think we can do. As I mentioned earlier on work in progress, we want to look at our honors and AP, in our college opportunities. The honors is very difficult in this infancy of Who Knew It to get that data, but I do have the advanced placement class data. I don't think this is a huge telling slide, but we do have a slight decrease this year in enrollment. Not anything large. It could be due to the pandemic. We'll keep an eye on it. That's not been typical over the past few years. Our AP enrollment tends to go up every year. But this slide shows whether we're underrepresented in our AP classes, and this is really important for us. And we do see that our Hispanic and our white students are actually the two groups of students that are underrepresented in our AP classes. And kind of generalizing that most of our AP kids come from honors classes, we're generalizing that once we can get our honors data to in aggregate with this, that this is similar. And most other ethnicities are kind of right in line, and it's our Asian students that are overrepresented in our advanced placement classes. So I've been talking for a long time, so we actually want to stop now, and we've got Dr. Kim. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so we can see everybody. I've got Dr. Kim as our timekeeper. We've kind of set aside 20 minutes to hear from you about what do you see that we should celebrate here? What are you concerned about, and what are you still wondering? And if we run out of time, because we're going to stop with 20 minutes to go on, we have a lot of time at the end to be able to circle back on anything that is still you haven't had a chance to discuss.
Great, thank you, Dr. Crumpy. I just have a few questions about the graphs. On page 8, or throughout the whole presentation, Filipinos are separated as a category. Why is that? Is that the categories that the state has divided ethnicities from?
Absolutely. Those categories are predetermined by the state of California for us.
I see. On one of the slides, it said American Indians.
Mm-hmm.
I think people might confuse American Indians with Indian Americans. Is it possible to change it to American Natives instead, so it's more clear?
We can. That isn't the way that the state is reporting the data to us at this time, but we certainly can do that.
Yeah, maybe put a parentheses or slash or something like that.
Okay.
That'd be great. And on page 18, there are a lot more ninth graders with a GPA 2.0 or less GPA. Do we know the reason why that particular group is like that during this time?
Yeah, so if you remember from Kara Heinrich doing our distance learning presentation a few board meetings ago, that's current data, and our ninth grade DNF rate during the pandemic was concerning to us. And so that is a group that the high schools took immediate action on. If I don't know if I can picture the slide, but I looked at it a lot, where our middle school students' grades actually were higher than first semester a year ago, but our ninth graders not so much. Our high school 9th through 12th in as a group were lower, but when you disaggregated it, the ninth grade was our alarming grade level of kids not doing as well during the first semester this year. Great,
thank you. I'll let my other board members ask any questions or make any comments before I ask a few things. Anyone want to ask any questions or make a comment? Dr. Gerson, and then Dr. Mohammed.
I did have one question. Dr. Crumpy, I'm not familiar with learning reintroduction. Would you explain that a little bit?
Wait, can you tell me where you're referring to?
It's a culturally responsive teaching and learning reintroduction.
Cool. No, cool. It's learning and it's culturally relevant teaching and learning.
Gil, do you have that slide?
I do. Can you you know what slide are you talking about? To help me out here.
I have to pull it up.
Oh, I'm sorry. On the efforts in progress. So I'm sorry. Now I know what I didn't know. I've got data on my mind, and you went back to that earlier slide. Sorry. I know what slide you're talking about. This is not the first time that this has been introduced. And so when we say it's a reintroduction, in fact, and trying to time myself and stay within my timeline, Tim and I were going back in time, my very first day stepping foot as a new teacher into the Torrance Unified School District was in a culturally relevant teaching and learning professional development. And that was in 19 and something. And it was a North High, training. And that was my first introduction in Torrance, was into how I utilized cultural relevancy into my instruction. And so that reintroduction is just, we kind of had to stop a lot of forward progress with things, with the introduction of Common Core standards and a new assessment, and then a new dashboard and new ways that we were being judged, graded, scored. And it kind of took us away from, really having that deep dive on instruction and what was important. And we've felt like through the last, 5, 7, 8 years, we've gotten a handle on that, and we're reintroducing.
Okay, so it's together. It's culturally responsive teaching and learning, reintroduction of that whole concept.
Whole concept. Yes.
Now,
sorry.
Now I understand that slide. Thank you.
Okay.
What slide was that on? What page? What slide number?
On slide 13.
13.
13, thank you. Dr. Mohammed?
Thank you so much, President Liu. Dr. Crumpy, thank you so much for sharing some data. My first question is actually referring to slide 9. I was just curious to know if other districts are also, how do we compare ourselves on a diversity scale with other South Bay districts that we always kind of compare ourselves to on other elements, and what does that, how they've been changing, right? We're seeing our changes. What does that look like? And the second question, I'll just kind of ask some of my questions. The second question is actually pertaining to slide, I believe, let me go to 14 here. It kind of talks about the survey respondents. I was thinking in my mind that we would have probably had more respondents, more people would be interested in kind of learning more about, or having more professional development opportunities. Is that number? So I'm curious about the 30-some% that are not requesting that, and what's the rationale for that in my mind. So that's something I'm just curious about. And then throughout the data, what I've kind of noticed is obviously low income and homelessness. I think those two are very prominent, while they represent a lower total number of students. But nevertheless, they're performing compared to the other groups on a much lower scale than the others. So, but within that, what are we looking at traditionally, and how is our focus changing if it needs to change? For example, have we always looked at it more from an academic lens to see what kind of intervention we need for those groups? Are we continuing to focus on that more, or are we shifting to look at some of our social, programs, or maybe some economic support, whether some kids can afford certain things or not? Are we looking at some of the mental awareness or challenges that they might be going through, and maybe providing some support there? So within these groups, how are we further dissecting that to kind of see what support or intervention is needed from what we've traditionally provided or offered? And then something else that was kind of curious about is on the AP. I wasn't expecting the white group to be, lower represented in the number of AP classes. So just kind of curious about that. What's the driver behind that? Thank you so much. Those are my questions.
So let me try to tackle a couple, and I can get back with you. I don't have the district comparison data, although what I can share is that Torrance is more unique in our diversity, and most of our areas tend to have a couple of ethnic groups, and do not have the large mix of students that I have, especially when you're looking at your Palos Verdes, your Redondos, your that surrounding area of the beach cities. just the mix of languages and diversity, their level of low income, homelessness is not there. And then when the kind of the other piece with our partners in Harbor City and in Gardena and in Lawndale and Hawthorne, they tend to be Hispanic majority, and they don't have a lot of other ethnicities as well. But I can put some comparison data and get back to you on that. I think it's interesting, if you study, in fact, Dr. Hawley has co-authored a book with another person that we have utilized, and his name is Dr. Anthony Muhammad. Unfortunately, he's upset because he comes from Michigan. Sorry, had to do that. They have co-authored a book, and one of the things that Dr. Muhammad talks about is the rate at which people jump into things and the readiness of faculty. And so where I hear you is like, what about this other 33%? Part of me says, and Dr. Egan got me this data, and I thank him for that. This is actually a high for an introduction to something. We don't usually see 2/3 of middle school of any teacher actually asking to do more professional development. But what we do though is that then we provide it. They've asked, so we provide it, and we don't exclude the other people that did not, that said that they didn't want to do it. And we find that when it is good, they will come. And so, and when they hear their PLC collaborative teachers, they're talking about it, and they didn't participate, then they will want to come. And so we actually, so I hear you. I see this as actually a positive number though, based on what we've learned about the rate at which people dip their toes into things. And so I think that's a good question. This is why I think it's so important that we're using a data management system that's going to let us dissect with greater ease than we've been able to do before, so that we can start, in kindergarten. We also don't want to wait until we get test scores in the 3rd grade, which means by the time we get them from the state, the kids are 4th graders. Way too late. We have to make these changes in the first few months that they're in kindergarten when we're noticing. And so being able to do some of the work that our teachers do within our guided reading levels but then being able to put it into a data warehouse to then pull this data back out will allow us to make those deep dives. It's what we've been doing in these 15-minute meetings when we're say holding them accountable, but it also is giving them the we kind of joke with them if they heard that they've been working under a pandemic the whole year, but it is very easy with the work that they do day to day in a school to be managers and not instructional leaders. And so these 15-minute meetings where we're saying, go back, find out how are these kids doing, come back, and not letting them also put them in a group. I think, Anil, like in my opinion, the personalization of knowing who they are by name and being able to say within a teacher's classroom, these are the 3 kids that you have that we are tracking, is 9/10 of the battle, is that awareness. And so being able to have that, and so that's kind of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years is trying to bring the personalization. It's very easy to assume that when you see it in an aggregate, that those aren't your kids.
Kind of like the name face story.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I don't have an answer for you about the white kids in the APs. We've got to look at this a little bit. We were very excited that the African American percent of enrollment matched our enrollment, because that has not been the case. And so we were excited that was at least on par. But we've got to look at this and do a deeper dive as well. These are great questions.
Ms. Park?
Yeah, so I really like that. I appreciated that the district is addressing the dress code and hiring practices and multi-curricular curriculum in our DEI statement. Some questions I had was internally, are we disaggregating data of Asian students? So I know that we talk a lot about the gap between Northeast Asian and Southeast Asian students, and that perhaps by putting one sort of putting them all together, that we may not be addressing the needs of the subgroup students. And then also, for if you could share a little bit more about the students in our district who are experiencing homelessness, if you provide some more context, is there anything about our students compared to students experiencing homelessness in neighboring districts or in the state that makes their circumstances different or unique, and what are like sort of the supports that we are providing?
Yeah, so yes, with this data, so prior to the data warehousing, being able to have this system that we put in place, disaggregating disaggregating has been difficult. So we are able to do a deeper dive with the different ethnicities, but we do not publicly talk a lot about there's a lot of unrest around some of that. I can tell you that where we have done this was within what how they're performing in acquiring English, and that has been we have been because quite often our English learners do well, and you look at the score and you may not think they do well, but if you consider the fact that once we reclassify them as non-English learners, and after they've been reclassified for a short period of time, they're no longer in that group. So when we're successful, then they don't count in there anymore. So it makes sense that our English learner group is going to be an underperforming group. We disaggregate that and uncover the languages to which we are not being supportive of it. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why the recommendation for the dual immersion class in Spanish, what was moved forward, is that when we disaggregate, by language, our Asian success of our Asian languages masks the lack of success of our Spanish speaking English learners. So that disaggregation is happening. And this homeless, we're keeping an eye on it. And this data is 2 years old. In that we're almost to testing season, so it's almost 2 years old. We have had a huge increase, and I've got to give a lot of credit to Dr. Gutierrez. She's listening on this call, because we are hopeful that when we start pulling this data, that we're going to be able to come back and report a lot of positive progress. Because of the work that she is doing and the personalization of the interns. When we saw this on these slides in preparation for this, just yesterday, we've held some additional listening sessions, and she held 2 with our homeless families, asking, what do you need? And she did it in English and in Spanish. And we actually got more participants in the Spanish speaking homeless group. So I think that's a little telling as well. We have a larger group that are part of shelters that were not in shelters, and I think too, because of the support that Nancy and her team are providing, we actually have more awareness of who they are. That increase, and I'd have to glance back in the slides, but it's over a 300% increase in homeless students, and I think that's because we're providing the support and they're talking to each other. And so we're finding out who they are so we can provide those supports. So I don't know that the data is apples to apples, but it is something that is concerning to us, and we want to do a deeper dive. We heard something that I've already talked to 2 of the principal groups, just because coincidentally those meetings were yesterday afternoon, and we had 2 principal meetings today. One of the things that came out of the Spanish homeless meeting yesterday was they're all back in school. So they picked blended, they're back. Thank you for bringing them back. But if they're in special education, they need counseling services, they need intervention supports. those are still being done a lot via distance. And they're saying that they need more support than that. So can we look to providing more in-person supports for them? So they gave us a lot of really good ideas of financially. The childcare, of course, came up. That we don't have a childcare license in this district to offer childcare, but we can and are planning on expanding after school offerings, so we can provide additional intervention and assistance and enrichment programs. They actually asked for being, they're not the group that can afford to pay for the chess man when a school, and those kinds of things that are engaging and helping those kids stay connected in school. So I know that I don't have complete answer to your question, but it is something that's really alarming to us that we want to continue to work on, and are working on.
Vice President Han.
It's just a quick question for me. A couple things is, first of all, that data management warehouse, is that going to be part of that new integration that we were presented with last week, last board meeting, that Gil presented with that new possible?
So Gil, go ahead. So Power School bought them all. So this is called Who Knew It. Power School bought Who Knew It. Okay. And then Power School also bought Schoology, right, Gil?
That's right, yeah. So Schoology,
different, because Schoology is a learning management platform, and right. Who Knew It is a data warehouse. So
I'm just wondering if some teachers might want that data, whatever it may be, will they have access to it? The second thing I have is, obviously we address Hispanic culture, we address African-American groups, whatever. But to me, the telling sign is more than ethnic, it's more socioeconomic, it's economic. So my question is, how do we address the low income as a group? Like, you don't have a low income parent meeting, you're not gonna have it like that. That sounds kind of weird, but I'm wondering, what is our strategy with low income? Because obviously when you look at the ethnicities, the numbers for low income just drops off the chart, right? So if you're African-American, you're low income, you're way below even your own peers, if you're Asian American. So low income to me is a big highlight. But I'm just wondering, how do we address that? How do you have parent groups, support groups, things like that?
And great question. And I think just seeing it represented this way on a chart is helpful, because being able to know that if they're low income and in another program or of an ethnicity, that is doubling the need for help. But Dr. McDowell brought something up, and I'm going to get your analogy wrong, but we have taken an approach to be hugely helpful in this district, and I think it's something about okay, unmic yourself, Dr. McDowell, about what is that saying?
So there's two pieces to it, and the saying is that a rising tide lifts all ships.
There we go.
And so when we have taken school-wide approaches to learning and intervention, it really does benefit all students. However, the data also implies that we need to, in addition to school-wide supports, be way more targeted in supporting our low-income students.
So for example, thank you. I will get that right the next time I try to say it. But so our schools are a higher intervention teacher, and they help any student that needs help. And that has been a philosophy of ours, of summer school programs. We invite anyone who needs help. And so that has been where our energy has been on ensuring that we're providing assistance to anyone who needs help. But it isn't giving that additional support because they're low income or because they're African-American and low income. And so I think that is our next piece, that I think looking at the data in this way really makes it easy to see that we need to, and I'm hoping that then the direction from the board that comes out of this meeting are, what are these things that we want to move to the top and highlight and require and expect? And so is it something specific that we put in it as an action in our LCAP that is specific to low income, in addition to helping all that need help. You know, I don't say gotten away from that, but we don't have something specific that says we provide this additional support because you are low income. We have provided the support because they need academic or social emotional, you know, help.
Right.
So
I appreciate that, but I think the challenge I have here is one of the board policy states that we identify cultural biases and practices and policies and all of that, right? And so what I'm not getting here is how do we monitor that? Like, you know, so you know, when we're talking about providing additional intervention for Hispanics, Americans, Afro-American, I feel like it's all the same. We try to get them summer school. We try to get them more help. It's just generic. You know, I don't know what our best practices are or our strategic efforts are. And I would love to see what's unique about each culture, because that way it tells me that we are not just throwing a one-size-fits-all approach to Hispanic, Afro-American, Asian, white, but that shows me that there is something more distinct, you know, more than just saying, well, we did a parent meeting in Spanish, or, you know, well, that's fine, that's great, but what other strategies are we implementing that would help me to say, oh, okay, you know, maybe we need to put a little more effort on that. And so I just don't know what our best practices are. I don't know how do we monitor that. I don't know how we, I haven't heard anything today that tells me that what we're doing with Afro-American, what we're doing with Hispanic Americans is any different. We try to get the intervention. We try to have the principals get on it, keep them accountable. It's just more like, it's just kind of like broad. It's very broad, you know, there's no intentional focus, you know, and I think that's what I would like to see is saying, hey, this is our strategic element. This is what we see in the African-American community that is a situation, and this is how we're going to attack it. Here's a situation with a low income. We know the money's an issue. Because of the money's an issue, they don't have the ability to send their kids to summer school because no one can take them. No one can provide rides, or no one, you know, whatever it may be. But we need to understand that situation better so that I don't know what it is with low income. I don't know, is it they don't have access? Is it because they don't have supplies? Is it because they don't have the drive? They don't have the support at home? I just don't know, you know. And so because I don't know what practices that we can bring in to help that segment of our student population. But obviously to me, that's a big red flag because that affects every race, right? When I saw that one chart, it's significant enough to say, hey, this low income is a big issue.
So we are, I'm gonna go back to when I was a teacher even, because I was the Title I coordinator at the middle school I worked at. We receive federal dollars under Title I based on the number of students we have for free and reduced lunch, right? So that low income population. And even then, and I know the practice continues, having been a principal at a Title I middle school, and all the work that I know so many people on this Zoom call do, specifically, I mean, so we know who the students are. Teachers know who those students are. And I can tell you from being in all of these 15-minute meetings in the fall and then again in February, that the principals are still working. They know who the students are, you know, the different categories that they represent, whether it's low income or the various populations, homeless, and really target it by the student. What's the intervention needed for that student? So they are doing those things. They know who the students are. And the presentation, you know, for today is more broad, but the sites are identifying those students in particular. And then back in 2013-14, when we implemented the local control funding formula, the board at that point in time supported the fact that we allocate additional dollars from the supplemental grant specifically to the sites based on the unduplicated percentages. So those are students low income, English learners, and foster youth. So on top of the Title I dollars that go to certain targeted schools that have a greater percentage of students that fall into that low income category, we also give all schools dollars specifically for the purpose out of the base or out of the supplemental grant to identify and provide supports. So certainly we can provide more information to the board based on what are those specific strategies that schools are utilizing for the various categories of students, if you will, that they have on their campus. But it's happening, and they are doing everything that they can, as well as looking for additional solutions to address the needs of those students.
But just to add to that then, Dr. Stowe, is that then the ROI is not very high. If you're saying in the past 4 years, since 2016, because the LCAP formula, we've been giving more money, the ROI on that money doesn't seem too big then, right? Because we're not seeing that huge increase, correct? Because you're saying we're throwing money out there, but when I look at the data, are we getting the ROI that we're expecting on the money that we have thrown out there in additional funds? Or should we be satisfied the fact that we've gotten to where we are? I just don't know. Because that's the question, right? You're asking us to evaluate culture, identify cultural bias, practices, policies, whatever. And so if we're throwing more money out there and we're not seeing the increase in data, then the ROI is not there. Therefore, we're throwing the money in the wrong places, right? We have Title I money. I get it. I was at a Title I. My kids are at Title I schools, and I've been to these meetings. And how do we monitor? Is this really the best way, effective way for us to do that? And so if this is the data, and you're saying that we've put more money out there, then we should see a greater return. That should be the expectation. And if not, then we have to basically say what we put our money in is not really working. We have to change our strategy. So that's my concern, right? So you just obviously you're telling us what you've been doing, and we put more money in it, but I don't see the.
Well, I think too, and then we're going to move on and table this till the end so we can get in, because I didn't hear Dr. Kim's bell ringer go off to move us on. We have increased over the past 5 years, and the gaps in most of those areas, have decreased. Every time we get, and we are a little bit in need, because we haven't had that we won't have the CAST results for 2 years now, we think. But they have gone up. Gaps exist. We need to keep working on those and to get better. So I think we tried to uncover today in this workshop where those gaps are, so that we can see what few things are the board's priorities to charge us to move forward. I do think I don't want to excuse the schools, but like I said in the memo to you guys last week, is the actions are all kind of even. There's 5 goals, and then they have actions in the goals, and we'd like to create an equity progress report. So here, this is kind of my ending, and then it's already on a slide, but we would like to create an equity progress report based on 3 or so things that we think that the data shows are our most pressing needs, so that we can go back and do a deep dive on those things. And so that is the direction we're looking from. What are those things that you're noticing, so we can highlight those and put them under a magnifying lens to get those results that we want, because that is what we want.
In the interest of time, we are about 13 minutes past our schedule.
Okay, I am resharing my screen. The good news is these are a lot smaller little chips in these next few sections to look at our suspension rate. And I share these colors with you. This is the 2019, because we did not get a dashboard this year. And you can just kind of see. Now I do need to, and I'm going to mention this a couple of times, I think, the foster youth here. We have a 44-bed facility for South Bay High School. Sometimes kids go in and out to the Starview, their hospital ward, to where there can be 60 kids that are on our dashboard that are not our students. And 100% of them are foster youth. And so for a dashboard, it really skews our data. And they got called out in 2018 because if a student was in a classroom and was misbehaving, they got sent back to their room, and the state of California said that that counted as a suspension. So this suspension rate for is we have actually disaggregated this, and I am happy to report that our foster suspension rate is quite low. But I just need to share that because our foster youth data, and it also affects some of the ethnicities too, that are part of that school. We are working tirelessly to try to adjust this and get the state to work with us. Because at the same time, if we do have an issue, we don't want to be able to have that as an excuse and have it mask, issues on our site. So we're trying to work so that that can get disaggregated and off of this dashboard for us. This year, and I think you saw this in a not this slide, but you saw information that in a Friday memo, we kind of did a projection and a proportionate ratio. So this is current data to where you can see. Now in this case, we like that the black TUSD dot for 2020 is lower, right? Because it's suspension rate. That you see here that in every case, but that foster youth, now I've explained that that's why they had that. And this kind of shows, if we know that they weren't suspending kids and they had this huge increase in suspensions, yet it only went up 1%, that really means that our Torrance foster kids are not being suspended. But this gives you our suspension numbers. Yes, it was a projection, and we know that sometimes our kids get naughtier at the end of the year. And I used, I think 27 weeks is to 40 weeks is whatever the suspension rate was. And then I calculated that new rate. Dr. Gerson will be excited for me that I actually did a math proportion to do the work here, but our suspension rates are decreasing. And for nearly every rate, that similarly with the county and the state, our Hispanic Latino rate is low, but is a little bit lower than the county. But we have put a lot of work into, and have more work to do, but have put some work into the suspension rate with, I think, 6 years now of the PBIS and the beginning of restorative justice work to really decrease this rate. And as you may remember, when we looked at this a few years ago, and we saw that it wasn't that necessarily our fights on campus and those kinds of things were increasing, that the suspension rates were largely due to an increase in drug use and vaping. And that's why we had last year had rolled out a lot of that parent education and student education in the vaping town halls. We were an answer to, trying to even reduce this suspension rate, even more. So see, that's easier. So just a couple slides now to kind of talk about any questions or thoughts or comments about the discipline data that you're noticing. And I will stop sharing my screen again. And Dr. Kim, 10 minutes now for this one. It's a shorter amount of time.
Dr. Mohammed.
Dr. Crumpy, thank you so much. Just clarification on slide number 36, where you talk about, I'm sorry, not 36. Let me go back to suspension rate, 34. Note on their CA rate, is that California rate or is that our rates?
That's California's rate.
Okay. So
no, you know what? That's a mistake. I take that back. That's our rate. I apologize.
And then so I thought they were our rate, but I just want to get clear.
Yeah.
And then number two, why is for example Filipino 1.5 in yellow, but students with disability at 3.8 in green?
Very good question. So the way that we get a color is both rate and change. And so you can actually be, So in fact, the very first year we got this, our American Indian was in the red. And when we looked at this and said, oh my goodness, we had 0 students suspended one year and 1 student suspended the next year. So it was 100% increase. And then that student left us, they were a senior, and the next year it jumped up to the blue again. So the way they do this, I actually like looking at just our rates and our change over time, because for suspension rate, and with some of our smaller subgroup data, that 1 or 2 kid difference has made, makes a large jump. I got a call from an elementary principal, I think before we closed last year, and she said, well, I'm sorry, I'm just letting you know I'm in trouble because I only have 7 African-American students on my campus, and 3 of them that are all related brought something to school that was illegal today. And I had to suspend them because it was a mandatory suspension for, it was a weapon, and 3 of them. And so there went my rate, and so those kinds of things, I think artificially alter this to some extent.
Ms. Park?
I think I understand the disaggregation and looking at and sort of benchmarking where Torrance is compared over time, but and then in comparison to the state and county. I wasn't hearing as much of how it should really be much lower for across all of these groups, right? And so like, how are we seeking to close the gap when it comes to African-American students, when it comes to students with disabilities? Because there's context. I understand that there are systemic barriers that and that there's an intersection of so many different things, but yeah, like, are we looking at adapting our policies or how we are implementing the things that are written to close the impact on these different groups?
No, absolutely. And I would say this is Mr. Pearson's area, and so I'm kind of presenting, on his behalf today. But as we, I think 6 years ago, started our K-8 work on PBIS, our positive behavior intervention and support pieces, the next piece has been moving into the restorative justice. We're a little behind, and I don't want to give excuses, except the way it got rolled out to one of our larger school districts over here to the east of us made it a 4-letter word. It lost its context. And we for some of our teachers, if we had started restorative justice 4 or 5 years ago, that percent, Anil, that 67% might have been 12. And they're asking for it now. And it was unfortunate, and I'm not trying to blame anybody, but it was unfortunately in a very, 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 very large school district. It got rolled out in a messaging was, doesn't matter what kids do, you can't suspend them. And that's not what restorative justice is. And so the good news is, and Dr. Egan has been working with the attendance and re-engagement committee. And I think an unintended consequence of this pandemic has been this group of people that have come together to take a more whole child approach, especially at the high school level, right? That high schools have not always traditionally embraced to a large extent. And they have, we heard examples in the 15-minute meeting. I think we're not there at the discipline yet because kids weren't on campus, but being able to realize when kids are in need of support and are in trouble and they're driving to their homes and they're knocking on their doors and they're doing whatever it takes, they're now asking. And so this is part, when I re-show that visual schematic at the end, now I have less to talk about because I'm good. I'm explaining it through your questions, is that restorative justice has not been done in formal trainings in this district. They've been one-offs. And this is something that is then going to be a more formal work so that they can work on that suspension rate. The first year we had the official, the American Indian in the red was the sample year of the new dashboard. The first real year, it was our homeless students that were in the red. And I thought, really? So they're homeless and we're suspending them to go where? And so, you know, just that conversation changed that policy and procedure, or I shouldn't say policy, change that practice at the school sites and having the conversation. So I'm hopeful that the restorative justice plan that will be rolled out through these committees with our counselors and our deans that we will have different, even better, you know, data. And it's wonky this year, right? Because of the closure, but we'll see what, because next year's data is going to look really good. And we can't, so how we count this in the next couple of years, we've just got to count it kid by kid. And I think it's a great point. And that's the need that before we closed down last March was on our things to do in our LCAP for last year. Anybody else on this? Okay, I'm going to reshare my screen and move on. And, you know, I think, and I'm not sure if I even showed Dr. Stowe that I had about 200 and something slides initially, because I really was trying to show where our work needed to be, not all of the things that didn't show that there were any issues. And so there was a lot of slides to try to keep this at 2 hours. And I almost didn't put graduation rate in and cut it because we do, you know, but I kept it in. So looking at graduation rate, again, that foster youth group are a lot of our South Bay High School kids. And you see the Torrance in the black on the far right that you know, our state and county averages of graduation rate that we do quite well in this area. Where we're lower are English learners. Remember, I've explained that this is the group that then are still English learners their senior year. We do have, when you talk about demographics and our students, these are not students that have necessarily, and actually for the most part, have not been with us since kindergarten. I remember not too long ago, South High actually won the award for the number of new English learner students that were level 1. And so we have students that are entering the country and entering the Torrance Unified School District at age 14. We know just from the work that board presentation on how well and quickly you learn a foreign language when you start that late is that they are not going to be fluent, you know, in a couple of years in high school. We give them a 5th year. We allow them to stay for a 5th year. We work hard to get them graduated. We just don't get credit for that on this. So we personalize that learning. Many of them, once you ever get the opportunity to go to a adult school graduation, some of them we work with our adult school so that we can give them a completion. Our students with disabilities, also and so we talk about dissecting this. When we dissect our students that are not in a special program, this number is quite high. North High School houses our regional program of high school students from all of our SELPA area districts that are our very most vulnerable medically in need students. They are not high school graduates for the most part. Even though their district of residence is someplace else, they count against the district and North High School in their graduation rate. Likewise, South High School has our STEPS program. And for the most part, those students are in STEPS because they're not diploma bound, they're completers. And so that we also don't get credit in this for those students that complete 4 years of high school with us and get their vocational training, move on to transition. That's at Hamilton Adult School, and we keep many of them for 4 more years. And then we're with the homeless and foster youth. Foster youth, there have been policy changes actually in both of these groups to where we can do everything we can to give them partial credits, to not hold them to the same board graduation policies. They can have just the state. For us, that's not hugely different. But there's also a lot of transiency within these two groups of students. If they started their freshman year with us and then they leave, they count against us. But regardless, working with these kids individually, kid by kid, the high schools could count on one hand how many non-graduates that they have at their individual school sites. And then college and career indicator, and this is also a year old. We didn't get the colors again, but this is something that we've noticed, and with just something that we've noticed for the last couple of years is and I'm going to go back a slide, while 92% of our African-American students graduate, and I can say that there's also, it's really closer to 98, 99. A lot of kids are in the South Bay High School that are also part of that subgroup. We graduate our kids. The white students here are 15% more likely to be prepared for college and career than our Hispanic students, and twice as likely to be prepared than our African-American students. This is why, and I think James, kind of back to some of the questions that you were asking, this is specifically why, and at North High School, this is where we saw some of this data happening, why we are pushing for the dual enrollment program, meeting with El Camino on Friday to expand that program. They move slower than we would like to. And we are identifying those students to be in this class. And when you talked about what are we doing, and as we dissect this group specific to our African-American students, there's a study that came out of UCLA that we were a part of, that said that, I think it came out 2 summers ago, so maybe almost 3 years now, that said that families, African-American families, know and realize that college is important. It isn't trying to do college days and college pride and all of these kinds of things. They are aware of college. They know about college. It's that that they don't think that financially that they have any choice. And so so it's undoing this belief that they can't get better. And so that's why we're spending, this is why we're trying to get them to ensure that they're A through G, meaning they've got their college credits to make them eligible, but why we're trying to have this partnership with El Camino and being able to hopefully offer an early college program in the next year or so that we can have these students be successful in this program. If we can get them with an AA or an AS degree by the time they graduate, or at the very least 1 year of college under their belt, El Camino, then they can matriculate to El Camino for free. El Camino has promise programs, and when you're accepted into that promise program as a low-income student, then there is also financial aid and scholarship money and a direct acceptance into Cal State Dominguez Hills. And so we are heavy in that pipeline of trying to make sure that this is a possibility. Dr. McDowell is starting a pathway to English 1 honors for incoming for our Hispanic and our African American students to have them take an honors class, not just put them in the class, provide them with the support so they can be in the class and be successful, so that they're more apt to take an AP exam. We know that the more they're in those courses, that they're more apt to go to college and to finish. So this is if you could tell, a little bit a passion of ours, of work that we're hoping to continue. Similarly, you're starting to see this pattern here of our of how we compare. This is 2020. So this is current. There was no county data provided for some reason. So this is not a dashboard, but because our graduating seniors last year did take the CASP as their junior year, we did get current numbers here for our student groups, and they are nearly outperforming the state averages in college and career. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And Dr. Kim, 10-minute timer for any questions here.
Vice President Han.
So just a quick question, Dr. Crumpy, thank you again for the data. So my question is, so it's interesting that you talked about how Afro-Americans know about college, they know about it, but they don't think it's worth it. But yet here we are trying to put them in honors, trying to get them to college, even though they know about it, they don't think it's worth it. So I'm gonna put my SoCal Rock hat on here now for a brief moment. Why is it that we can't help them to maybe find a different career path? Because college is not the path for them. Why not partner with SoCal Rock, right? Why not get a career technical? Why don't we try to partner SoCal Rock, try to make things more technical, more CTE, trying to find a career path for CTE rather than dual enrollment? That's one option. If people want to go that route, they want to explore that route, that's great. But I think it'd be great if we could somehow also provide a different path, right? If this, like, whether it be electrician, plumber, whatever it may be, they may find more interest in that. And I don't know how well we're promoting technical schools or whatever it may be for that path. So that's my SoCal Rock hat.
Well, we're working with El Camino on their college pathways so that students have that opportunity to make up that decision. And it's not that they don't want to, it's that they don't think that they can afford it. It's a financial piece. It's not that it's, so I just want to clarify. It's, they know that college is something that they aspire to do. They just don't think that they can get there financially, that it's not something that their family can afford to do. It's an affordability piece. And so working with those pathways like that we have, and because with El Camino has been the route that we've been taking.
And I appreciate that, but again, not everyone is geared for college, and I think that this is something that I think it'd be very fruitful for us to think about and look at here. I think with career technical education right now, obviously, and I think for students, I think that if we can help them on a path to a career that's not necessarily college bound, I think it would be helpful. I think that to bring greater awareness, to give the kids the option, I think, it seems like we're committed to this one path, but I'm wondering whether or not we can at least create an option on the career regional occupational side. And something that's what I would like to see now, being on the SoCal Rock board. I see a lot of benefit for a lot of the students that go that path, and I see a lot of fruit from that path. And so I'm just wondering, how can we as a district, especially for the kids that are not on this pathway, at least give them the option, or let's be aware of that option. I don't know how well we are promoting that option. It seems like it's either this or nothing. I'm not saying it should be either this or nothing. I'm saying, here, this is the path that we want you to go, but if that's not what you want, have you ever considered this? And here is this career tech side option, whether we improve our CTE portion in our district, or whether we partner with SoCal Rock more intentionally. I think that's what I think will be helpful. I think for this career slide.
Ms. Park, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, well, I think Vice President Han said ditto. I think it would be great, in addition to the pipelines that we're trying to create for tertiary education, to also to ELCO and the opportunities we're providing with UCLA, that we also simultaneously create pipelines for students who are interested in vocational or career technical education. And so yes, I think I just wanted to agree there. I think that another thing is the CCI, the indicator, it's confusing to me. I don't know. I haven't dived too much into it to see what the different factors are that and whether they are highly correlated with actual employability or with the ultimate, student success in terms of them being able to have a career that they are happy in. I know that's like a weird, like it's not just about your salary. It's not just about whether you're going into a job market that is booming or like whatever it is. I think that there is another, like maybe our responsibility as a board is to think through that as well. It's not necessarily, I understand that there are metrics that are being imposed upon us externally, but internally, what are our goals for our students and how we're preparing them? Is it for them to just go to college, or like what is college supposed to do for them? And is college supposed to just make them more employable? And so, yeah, I would love to have at some point a board discussion about what our ultimate goals for our students is, because I'm going to use like the fluffy word of happy, like I want them to be happy in their career. But I don't know what the rest of the board thinks.
Dr. Gerson?
Dr. Crumpy, 2 questions regarding El Camino. How much do we pay for students to go to El Camino?
0.
And how does El Camino offer also career technical education pathways in what their offerings are?
Hundreds of them. Yes.
I think perhaps the board it would be good if they knew of how fruitful these programs are and financially viable, and the advantages of having it on a college transcript already. I know ELCO helped me a great deal, that when I entered college, I was already almost a sophomore. And so I know that they saved me a lot of money when I got to my private school. So thank you.
And the CTE it's a evolving field with the different funding structures that have been put in place through the consortium with Adult Ed and El Camino and all these different options. So definitely that's some information that we can bring back to the board for sure.
Yeah, Jasmine, the college and career indicator is confusing. And I think you're right. There are things being imposed upon us, but it's still changing. So they kind of keep some of those metrics that you talk about success. But if you've participated in an ROTC and you've got the military pieces, that counts. If you've been a completer through a career tech ed pathway, that counts. There's even some work around our special education students who have completed a certificate of job readiness, that is they're looking at that counting, taking one college course, while you're in high school, that count, so I can put something together. It's not static right now. They're using data behind the scenes, and every year we kind of get it. They make adjustments on the back end. But that I can put something together, kind of lets you see the schematic of how one is considered college and career ready in the state of California.
That would be great, Dr. Crumpy.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Park?
I was also curious for students who are interested in four-year universities, do we have partnerships with programs that do provide the funding for low-income students and students of color to attend? Because I know that there are a lot of them out there, and I wasn't sure if students had to find them independently. Like, what are the internal supports within TUSD to know which schools provide, full funding, full need-based scholarships for students under a certain income and things like that. Yeah.
Well, and I think, if you have more information, Dr. Stowe, speak up, please. But a number of years ago, we added a college and career coordinator on each of our high school site so they could help navigate that specifically. We had, 3 and then returned to 4, academic guidance counselors. But that's one of the roles of that coordinator to work with those students. The formal program that we have is through El Camino and Cal State, Dominguez Hills, but that's not to say that we don't help in needs based through the FAFSA, and then the work that they're doing with those students that of providing those scholarships. I know one specifically that was a year ago's graduating class. There hadn't been anybody at a given university that I have some affiliation with, and we were able to give a student because they were, as long as you had a certain GPA and you were Hispanic, they had $30,000 to give away every year for 4 years. And so one of our students got that money. And so now I think we're on their radar, and we submit many names for that scholarship for kids going to that university. So I think that but formally, where a private school, like, through our scholarship piece, but we don't have other formal partnerships other than our coordinators, assisting the students.
Yeah, and I don't think it needs to be through formal. Oh, sorry. Did I interrupt someone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Just to confirm, that was 10 minutes when the bell rang.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, but basically I wasn't thinking formal partnerships, but I just know that some of these programs require nominations. And then if it's through, these one-on-one relationships, and there's just so much when it's one person to like 400 students, and when it comes also to, there's just like bias can play out in different ways. And so I just want to make sure that when you were mentioning that families are concerned about the affordability of college, that information is being conveyed to the students who need to hear it, and that it's coming before high school even, right? And that the district is providing that messaging, and that all of these pathways are achievable pathways when students need to hear it, which honestly I think is like elementary, middle school, that think these are possibilities.
Well, I want to say it was 2009, 8, 9, 10, that we had a college going culture committee. There was a board member on there. Mrs. Reagans was on there, counselors, APs, and principals from the middle and high schools. And one of the outcomes of that was that all the schools were going to do some sort of college awareness, college week, parent information nights. And so I know Mr. Jackson, who's our principal at Bertlin, just said in a meeting within the last few weeks that they still do that. And so, that there are some of those pieces that the schools are continuing to try, but certainly, at the secondary level, I know Dr. Egan will continue to follow up to make sure that information is getting out there, working with those 4 college career counselors that are at or 4 college career coordinators, I think is the title, at the high schools. Those were put in place, classified positions, when we restructured the counseling office at the high school. I want to say that was 2013, 14, that they were specifically put in place to assist with the scholarship availabilities, applications, coordinating the college visits, a lot of those pieces that are done, and also work as a liaison to the middle schools. So certainly more information can be provided, We have made quite a bit of inroads there in the last 10 years, though, and just continue to try to message that.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and turn it over to Dr. Liberati.
Dr. Crumpy, thank you very much. Dr. Stowe, Ms. Liu, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to share a couple slides and take a few minutes. The slide we're currently looking at provides some information for us to be able to work from. The information, as you know, employees are not required to indicate their ethnicity, but I don't think it changes these numbers much. So just looking at the slide, we see that we have far more students in a particular ethnic group than we do teachers, in this particular case, certificated staff. So looking at the information, what do we do with this information? How do we use it going forward to support students? As we know, teachers in the classroom are probably the most important piece of the student's success. So looking at this particular slide, going on to the next slide, and A kind of is covered in this slide. But this year, what we've been doing in analyzing what we do on a regular basis, and if you ask your friendly HR person, what's your primary goal, that's to hire the best and the brightest, to recruit, to bring folks in, and then hopefully keep them here working with our students long term. This year, we've been fortunate in that via the virtual platform, we've been able to attend 9 fairs so far, 8. We have 1 more to attend. And so we've been able to do that. So some information we're providing to the universities is, although we prefer to attend the fairs in person because it gives us an opportunity to talk to individuals live and to show them where Torrance is. I'm always surprised when we have a student that doesn't know where Torrance is, but nonetheless, it gives us that opportunity to start building a relationship right away. We're hoping that some of the virtual stuff will continue because it'll allow us to continue to grow our recruitment and the universities that we're actually able to attend and recruit from. We also continue to use EdJoin for recruitment. It's a good platform. Individuals are able to apply and submit their paperwork. And then of course, we also paper post. What's new this year is that we're actually using a platform called Handshake. And that's given us an opportunity to, via the Handshake platform, to advertise at 8 historically Black colleges, or via the platform, 8 historically Black colleges have been able to direct their students to this platform where they find multiple districts, including Torrance Unified, seek and look for positions, are able to look at what the position is, and then through EdJoin, apply to Torrance, hopefully. A couple of things we're working through, and we do have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. Talked about this in the past. With LACO, we had 1 meeting earlier this month, hope to meet on a monthly basis. But one of the things that we're looking at is hopefully starting some sort of reciprocity, talking with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, because students coming in after completing their credentials to California have some other hoops to jump through in order to obtain and complete the California credential. We're hoping to, working through LACO, establish some agreements with multiple states so that employees, students that come in to Torrance have an easier time of transitioning. We, of course, support students as they come on, but it always takes a few more classes depending on what state they're coming from. So we're looking at that in addition to analyzing the entire process of how we recruit, how we hire, what we do, increasing the pipeline, increasing the region that we're advertising through, looking at different colleges and universities and establishing those relationships. I've talked prior to, and you know about our student teachers. We are able to, via that particular program, actually hire quite a few qualified individuals that actually do their student teaching through Torrance. But looking at alternative outreach programs, and then of course looking, once we are able to recruit and bring qualified folks into Torrance, the actual hiring process, the interview, and involving other divisions and other departments to ensure that what we do is fair and equitable in that hiring process. So anyways, I wanted to share that information and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So this kind of brings us back to one of the first slide, and kind of just talking about, you know, what's next. And we've talked about some of these things already. And I'm going to kind of start to the left. And we're excited that, as you saw in a prior note to you, that I think before spring break, Dr. Liberati is going to post the job offering to hire a history social studies expert teacher that will be working with Kara Heinrich on the seal of civic engagement and also the pathways towards achieving that. That will be a senior award that we would have a 5th and an 8th grade pathway towards civic engagement that includes a student advocacy component, and also we'll be heading up the newly adopted multicultural curriculum. I'm still kind of awaiting to see any legislative follow-up to this approval. This approval was through the CDE. There was you may recall that a prior curriculum assembly bill was vetoed by the governor, making it a graduation requirement. We anticipate that there's going to be some reintroduction of that material, and are kind of looking to see what the legislative guidance will be as we start working with these materials. So that's an exciting addition for us. So all of those kinds of those pieces are new that we will be able to keep continually updating you. The culturally responsive teaching and learning, as I mentioned already, we are hoping to very soon choose the expert that we will be using to provide training to our teachers. That 67% that want this specific training, but also we're going to ensure that every director and teacher expert, our TOSAs or our resource teachers, are also part of this training, because it is our expectation moving forward that they will, I think I mentioned this, this will be a component within all of the trainings that we do. So a new teacher to Torrance in math that does something called the freshman and the sophomore cohort. It's a 2-year math training program that we offer. They will have culturally responsive teaching and learning explicitly taught within that math instruction that they get. Dr. Liberati talked about the hiring practices and the work within that. The other things, kind of in addition to the culturally relevant teaching and learning, it is our hope that we start this training process with this consultant that we will bring in as soon as possible, so that training with the teachers can happen in the summer. Many of our teachers prefer to be trained in the summer and not have to be out of class or do things in the evening and the weekends. And then our administrators, when they return in August, they will receive this training as well. 2 other areas that we are also in June hoping to have training for all of our site administrators and leadership. In fact, all of our district administration on an anti-bias training. And with that, I mentioned that we had, these 60 people that went through a course, and from there we had committee people emerge and a leadership team. We had to kind of put that on hold just for a few weeks because we've been reopening schools in the month of March. But that will be, they will start meeting again right after spring break so that we can solidify the experts to bring in to do explicit anti-bias work. And then I think I'm also very excited so that will be in June is the plan. And then also in June, a strength-based instruction. When you see a little red dotted line up there with significant disproportional, we are significantly disproportionate in this district. And what that means is the state is mad at us. And we had to write very lengthy plans, Dr. Hall did, and set aside a lot of money out of the general fund to rectify this, this over-identification, in their opinion, of our white students being considered emotionally disturbed. And so one of the things within that plan is that both anti-bias training, so that's written within this plan as well, but also there's training where we can actually have a glass half full model here and focus on the strengths of the learner and having our teachers better able to identify what those strengths are and then instruct instruct in that way that best brings out the strengths in that learner, and to also help that student identify what their strengths are so they can actually utilize those strengths within their own learning as they learn to own their learning. And so this strength-based instruction in June is something we're also very excited to move forward. And then this bottom piece here, I think I spoke of the PBIS work that our K-8 schools have been doing and will continue to do. And then taking a look at our board policies and administrative rules around the dress code, but also that movement in the restorative practices training and programs at our high school. And then as we've kind of talked about a lot of these things, our next steps is the possible design of an equity progress report, wanting to hear from you if there's kind of an agreement of key areas that jump out at you that need to be addressed first. I think everything's important. We want to address everything, but what are these couple of things that we want to really focus on and that we would then bring back to you and being able to report on? And then likewise, our school sites would address these within their school plan, their single plan, and address these with their staff and their community, a few times a year as well. We are beginning not only our LCAP consultation, and we will have an LCAP. I didn't talk a lot about that today because there's an LCAP board workshop in about a month or month and a half in the middle of May. But when we really look at our LCAP, these components are there. And so whether we need to heighten, make them more apparent, add to them, but we are in the middle of this LCAP presentation. In fact, some of these slides that I shared today, we are utilizing so that we're giving them a basis for the input is what context are we looking at? As I've talked too much already about our data warehouse. And then, as I mentioned from the prior slide, the professional developments starting in June to then kick off the 2021-22 school year and beyond.
So at this point, I think just some more comments from the board on these points. We all took pretty good notes based on the questions that you've asked so far. So we'll reflect on those and see what we can provide maybe through the LCAP or through some other process to be able to get additional data. But we'd like to hear your thoughts now.
Vice President Han.
Just a quick comment on Dr. Liberati's presentation. Thank you so much. It's a couple of questions I have. Again, I think that we have to be intentional and strategic. And I love the handshake platform that we created. But my question is, why would a minority want to work in our district? We have to ask those questions, right? We could advertise all we want, right? But if we don't understand the needs of the people, for example, an African American may find, you know what, I would rather work in the inner city with my people because I get paid more, right? So obviously, we understand ultimately what they are looking for? Number two, I think that we have to examine our own hiring practices too, from a cultural lens. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that we're doing a cultural language instruction, right? We're trying to understand our students and their cultural background so that we will understand why they act the way that they do. In the same way, when we hire teachers, what we may consider from a quote unquote white man's perspective of a strength may not be a strength in the Asian American. For example, I'm a pastor. So we have church planting assessments, right? So we talk about how if you're qualified to be a church planter, to begin a church. And so when we go to these assessments, they're all white people, white guys, right? And so they're going to assess you whether or not you are going to be able to be successful in starting a church. And so they have these practices that are very white oriented. For example, they put a piece of paper on the table and they want to see whether or not you have initiative, right? So they'll wait to see who will grab the paper first. Now, Asians are not like that. Asians are always people that defer. Is that a strength or is that a weakness, right? And so you have these kind of practices that are culturally biased, but yet we don't realize that it is culturally biased, and that's why I think it's important that when we have these groups that hire teachers, it has to be very diverse. I think that we would understand that the cultural insights that we may have, may be radically different. For example, a strength of an African-American teacher may not be considered a strength, perhaps by a majority culture. They might see it as a weakness. But in reality, it could be a strength, It's just a matter of what culture they're trying to reach. And I think those are the things that I think that it'll be important for us that we would evaluate. I just don't want to bring people in, it's like the NFL, right? The rule is you got to interview an African-American coach before you can hire anybody else. I just don't want this to be a token expression that we're doing. But I think we have to ask ourselves is, would a minority want to teach in Torrance Unified School District? Why or why not? And I don't know the answer to that question, and I think that'll be a very interesting question to find out. Like, would an African-American want to teach in our district? If not, why not? What are the issues that an African prospective teacher might have, or a Hispanic teacher might have, or even an Asian American teacher might have to work in our district? And maybe something that we don't realize, because we're so used to the way that we're doing things. It's just that we don't see that outward perspective, right? So we could put it on paper saying, hey, here's an opening position, Torrance, come and apply, without even asking the question is, would they want to apply in a district like ours? Why or why not? If our pay is too low, if our, the makeup of our community is kind of different off, whatever. I think it'll be good for us to know, just so that we can look better on paper. So when an African-American, Asian American, Hispanic American look at it like, dude, this is a school that I feel like I can go to, a district I can work in, I want to work in, those are the things that I think that we have to start talking about. We talk about cultural inclusion, right? That's what we're doing for our students, right? We're trying to help our teachers understand where our students are coming from so that they can instruct better to them. In the same way, I think it comes to our hiring practices as well. It begins with the top with us, that we kind of get retrained and the way we think so that we would understand, oh, this is what our people are looking for so that we can attract more minorities applying for positions.
I couldn't agree more. I completely agree with everything you said. So a couple of things, the implicit bias, training we need. Dr. Crumpy talked about that. And of course, sharing that information and ensuring that as we work through these processes, because folks that train in these particular, with these particular issues will tell you, we all have implicit bias. But it's recognizing that and ensuring that that's not getting in the way of what we do and what we need to do. You heard me say we want to hire the best and the brightest. How do we recruit folks? One of the questions is, why Torrance? You asked the second question, why not Torrance, if somebody doesn't want to work in Torrance? Part of the reason for my request of Nick Stephanie at the county to put this committee together was because I want to learn from other districts. I want to hear what they're doing. So is it just Torrance? Is it other districts? Well, I found out first, other districts have the same issues. Hiring and recruiting, hiring, and then retraining qualified applicants and teachers of color. We're having the same issues. Using the handshake is going to be a great barometer for us. Are we going to be able to recruit from historically Black colleges? One, if not, why not? Here comes that question again, right? We think a couple of stumbling stones. One, California is not cheap to live in, unfortunately. Hate to use that as an excuse, but it is what it is. And then the other stumbling block of the credential, hoping to get over the credential piece so we could bring people in. And then when they're here, having talked to Dr. White in Compton and Ms. Park actually sent me some research from Compton, talked to her a little bit. They have the same issues, recruiting and hiring qualified applicants of color, especially African males. And then once they're hired, making sure that they stay. The question is, why not? Well, responses have been, I don't feel like I'm part of the faculty. I don't feel like I'm a family member. I don't feel like I'm included. I don't feel like I'm part of the planning that happens initially. These are all pieces I think that we're going to use, I'm going to use to put this bigger plan together. What I shared today were just a few pieces, knowing that we were very, very limited in time. But when I talk about looking at the entire process, looking at the recruitment, looking at the hiring, looking at the retention, and then all the pieces within there, starting from what we do all the way through, as you mentioned, Mr. Hahn, what are the committees doing at the school sites that ultimately, when we do send them 6, 7, 8, 10, whatever it is, number of qualified teachers for that particular position, do they have a committee? Is it a committee that's inclusive of their staff, representative of their students, and are they hiring the best individuals, recognizing implicit bias and ensuring that questions, like you gave an example, questions don't necessarily exclude people, but include, right? And so we're looking for the best and the brightest, going back to my original and primary objective. Dr. Mohammed may agree with that from an HR perspective, but great questions, outstanding. That is very quickly in a minute summary, my response to your questions, really the entire plan, looking at that goal holistically. Thank you.
Dr. Gerson and then Dr. Mohammed, and then we'll wrap this up. And then Ms. Park.
Before I make my statement, I do want to make a comment. I want to express appreciation to the Torrance Council of PTAs for being on and sticking it out with us, because I've seen a lot of them as participants. So thank you for that. So I was thinking back to an early slide on positive school culture. We've talked a lot about academics. We've talked about suspensions. We haven't really talked about what's happening on campuses. I know Dr. Mohammed kind of alluded to that early on. And when I think about multiculturalism over the years, you know, how we used to have tolerance was the big word, and move to acceptance, and inclusion has been the word of our current age. And so I feel like we still have a lot of students who either feel invisible or are made, you know, that we haven't even necessarily gotten to the acceptance in some cases, and to make everyone feel included. And I know we've talked about different school cultures, even from a kindergarten class at my children's school, where the teacher gave out M for minister, but it was to a non-Christian child. So minister is a generic term for within Christianity. And so, but as a result, there was a conversation, and a mosque appeared in the community, and a synagogue appeared in the community, and it became more inclusive. We've also talked about the other school that my children go to, where, you know, a mariachi band was brought in for Dia de los Muertos, how Christmas and Hanukkah were celebrated equally. And so as we talk about positive school culture, what are we talking about as far as all students feeling in some way included in their school environment, that we're not missing out and making anyone feel invisible? So that's where my mind was. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This question is for, or just comment for Dr. Liberati. As you know, as we're talking about staff on the certificated side, just want to make a point that equal number, or, you know, in some cases we have on the classified side. And so perhaps we can engage with the personnel commission, and just to kind of see, you know, what strategies they have in terms of, you know, looking at diversification and our classified ranks as well. So maybe just looping them into the conversation, and I'm sure that's already happening, but just wanted to make a note on that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. It certainly is happening in the PD development that we're doing for classified staff, but, you know, as you know, Ms. Schutt and I have pretty regular conversations regarding recruitment, et cetera. But thank you for the suggestion, much appreciated.
Yes. So
yes, go ahead.
I have a list of things I'd like to see, and you can pick and choose what's feasible or not based on our district. capacity and context, but I would love to see like support groups, affinity-based support groups for our staff and our particularly our teachers or educators and staff from underrepresented groups. I think that would help with the feelings of maybe tokenization or feeling like you are not welcome, or you may be hired as a very qualified applicant, but you may not stick around if you don't feel like Torrance is home. And so in terms of making TUSD a more, and that's not something that newcomers should necessarily be initiating. It would be great for them to be able to come into that. And so I would love to perhaps working with Mr. Eddy and his experience with the Compton Male Teachers of Color Network, see if there are ideas and perhaps there's already work being done. If so, we'd like to celebrate it. And so love to hear more about that. For the dress code, I would like to see student input into revising our dress code. First of all, assessing if it is reflective of our current context and what we need from a dress code in our current context. And I'm not talking about during distance learning, but just this day and age. And I would love for students to have more of a voice in shaping what the dress code looks like for the district. And I would also like to see more. I know that the state the ethnic studies, I know it's in flux, but the state does seem to be giving districts significant latitude in terms of what it looks like within our district. And I would just like to make sure that in addition to educators, that student community input is being incorporated in that process, and that there is significant emphasis on, again, student voice in shaping what the ethnic studies curriculum looks like and what are the options that we look at there. And like to look at equity outside of just academic achievement. I know that students are we have our ELA and math courses, but there's also a lot of extracurriculars that students are engaged in, and would like to see if we have data, if there are potential barriers, whether it's in terms of income or transportation or whatever it may be, for certain groups of students not having access to certain extracurricular activities, or potentially it's just the traditional demographic makeup of that particular extracurricular activity. I like to make sure that we're addressing that as a district. And related again to clubs, I've mentioned human relations ambassadors several times because it was so pivotal during my time at North, being a part of that club. And so I know that they exist in some forms, but I would love to see more empowerment of students to shape what their school climate looks like, and equipping them with the tools to be conflict mediators, to be able to address incidents of discrimination in a way that is productive. And so, yeah, I understand that there are already some clubs that exist, and I think that across primary and secondary schools, if we can just have some way for those clubs to sort of share what's good or not, and have a more systemic approach to empowering students to shape their own school climate.
That was great, Ms. Park. Are there any other comments from the board members or staff in this? And Dr. Crumpy, do you have a good idea what direction we want to go?
This is a very good conversation. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So if there are no more discussion, I will go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
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 Great. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.